For this assessment for day 5, you're asked to print just the third element in the list, should it exist. You've seen the for loop, the definite for loop, which lets you print every element in a list, and now we're making a little twist on it. So let's get started. Let's start with the basic structure where you want to print every element in a list. Let me define a function to do just that. Given a list of elements, how do I print every element in the list? Well, if you just print out the list itself, you go to run this, you'll see that this isn't doing exactly what I want. I mean, it is printing out all the elements, but I want to print them out one per line. So this is where the definite for loop was introduced. And you want to do something for every element in that list. I'm going to call this list vals to remind myself that it is, after all, a collection. If I run this function, this will actually print all the elements, and they'll be printed out one per line, as you see there. So now we're getting closer, but somehow I want to print out just the third element in a list. Now, there are many ways to do this. The one I'm showing now is to use the if statement and to keep track of some information as the loop is processing. So this may be a new skill that you're learning now for the first time. The definite for loop lets you do some set of operations for every element in the list. And in this case, as you can see, the only operation is to print that element one at a time. But what I really want to do is if I had a function called print just third, and if I were to imagine getting the list 2, 4, 5, whatever, then I want to have the third one printed out, which is 2, 4, it's the number 5. So how do I make this work? Well, let's start with some slight variation and see if we can be inspired by that. What if I want to print out every element in the list, but I also want to print out each element and its current location in the list? Element 2 is at the first spot, element 4 is at the second spot, and so on. So I'm going to introduce a new variable to keep track of the current spot where an element exists in the list. Let's start and call that index. Let's say that index initially starts off being 0. It's a good default for most values that we come up with. Now the first time through this loop, I have element is set to the value 2. That's the first element in the list. The second time through the loop, element is set to 4. I need to do something with index, basically. Each time through the loop, I need to do something to increment it. So what if I were to say the following? Every time through the loop, I add 1 to the current value of index. This is useful because, after all, 2 is the first time through, 4 is the second time, 5 is the third, 8 is the fourth, and so on. So that value, that index position, I'm just going to keep track of one at a time as I go through. And now I want to make an output that will print out each element and what index position it is at. So I'll just add the following element, and to do this properly, I need to convert element into a string because I'm going to do string concatenation. Element is at position index. So this pulls together some of the ideas we've seen in the last few lectures. And if I take this and run it on my sample that I'm going to use, print just third. All right. Well, this is doing some interesting things. It's showing me all the values one at a time, but more than that, it's showing each value and its current position, the first, the second, the third, and so on. So if I want to print out just the 5, then I need to do something different. And this is where an if statement comes in. It allows you to write a certain bunch of code, and it may do different things under different circumstances based upon the value of an expression. In this case, my expression is hopefully pretty clear. If the position is 3, then I know I'm actually at the third element in the list. And only at that time do I want to print out some information. So if it ever turns out that as I'm going through this loop, if index is ever equal to 3, now you've seen the equals operator in the lecture. Let me just verify that we know exactly what that means. If you want to set a variable x to be equal to 5, you use the equal operator. And this is called the assignment operator, x equals 5. And now x is the value of 5. If you want to check to see if x is equals to the number 5, I need to use an if statement. If x is equals 5, which is the way of saying, hey, is x actually equal to the value 5? It's not an assignment operator, it's an equality check operator. If x is equal to 5, then I can just print this out. However, if x actually is not equal to 5, in this case x is 6, then nothing happens. Because after all, x is not 5. So we use the if statement when we want to divert the flow of statements to do something under a specific set of circumstances that we may not do at another time. So all I'm going to do here is print the element. So if index is equal to 3, equals operator, I'm going to print the element. So remember in my list that I had over here, I just want to print out the third one from left to right, 1, 2, 3, is indeed 5, as you just saw there. Now in the lecture, I introduced a statement called break. A break statement is one that you can use to terminate a for loop. The reason why it's useful basically comes down to the following observation. If it turns out that vals, as a list, had 1,000 or 10,000 elements, and I really just want to print the third one, then when I get to this point, not only have I accomplished my task, I'm done with the for loop. And so with a definite for loop, when you set it up in advance, you know how many times you want to execute it. But if you choose to stop prematurely, then you can say break. And so this now will do the exact same thing we just saw. It just would be slightly more efficient because once it sees the third element, it prints it and it's done. And this break statement says, break out of this for loop and stop it from executing further. And since that's the last statement in the method print just third, then the whole method is now done. This completes the assessment for day 5.